Sis, you don't have to do all this for me.
If I don't do it, who will? Just focus and become somebody in life.
So everything I did, everything I sacrificed, this is what you both became? Big sister, I didn't mean for it to go this far.
Please, it was a mistake. It just happened.
You both did this in my house under my roof.
I thought my life was finally perfect until I picked up my husband's phone. It was a Tuesday evening. Jollof rice was bubbling on the stove. Afrobeats was playing low from the sitting room speaker, and the warm Lagos breeze was coming through the kitchen window. The kind of evening that makes you close your eyes and whisper a quiet thank you to God. Everything smelled like peace. Everything felt like home. Daniel had left his phone on the kitchen counter when he went to shower. I was not suspicious. I was never the suspicious type. That was the kind of woman I was. Trusting, open, deeply grateful for the life I had built. I picked up his phone only to call him, to tell him that food was almost ready. That was all, just that. But before I could dial, the screen lit up with a message preview, and the name at the top of that message made my hand freeze in the air. Sandra, my sister, my blood. The little girl I had carried on my back the day our mother was buried. The same Sandra who was sleeping in the guest room of my house, at that very moment. The message read, "Last night was everything. I miss you already. When are you coming to me again?" The wooden spoon in my hand fell to the floor. The sound it made on the tiles felt like a gunshot. My ears rang. My vision blurred at the edges. The jollof rice kept bubbling on the stove like nothing had happened, like the world had not just collapsed beneath my feet. I did not scream. I could not move. I just stood there, in my own kitchen, in the home I had bled to build, and felt something cold and dark pour through me from my head to my toes. I scrolled up. God forgive me, I scrolled all the way up. The messages went back 6 months. 6 whole months. They were words that made my stomach turn. They were photos I cannot describe. They were voice notes I wish I had never played. They were "I love yous" and "I need yous" and "she will never find out," exchanged between the two people I trusted most in this world. My husband, my sister, at my table, in my home, looking me in the eyes every single day. By the time Daniel walked back into the kitchen, smelling of my soap, wearing the slippers I had bought him, smiling that easy smile I had once loved so deeply, I had already become a different woman. Something in me had quietly died, and something harder, something sharper, had taken its place. He saw my face and stopped walking. "Vivian," he said, "what's wrong?" I turned to look at him slowly. My hands were steady. My voice, when it came, was low and cold in a way that even surprised me. "Daniel, who is Sandra to you?" The smile disappeared from his face, and in the silence that followed, in that 2-second silence where he searched for a lie and could not find one fast enough, I got my answer. I did not need him to say a word. But to understand how deeply this betrayal cut me, you need to understand where I came from. You need to understand what I gave up. You need to know the full story of Vivian and Sandra, because this did not begin on a Tuesday evening in Lagos kitchen. This story began many years before, on the worst day of my life. I was 22 years old when our parents died. Not together. That would have been too simple for the kind of suffering God had written for our family. First, our father, a quiet man who worked at the motor park in Ibadan and smelled of engine oil and Pierre's soap. He died of a stroke on a Wednesday morning, still in his work clothes before he even reached the gate. Then our mother, 8 months later, as if her own body had decided that life without him was not worth the trouble. She went in her sleep. Peaceful, the neighbors said. But there is nothing peaceful about waking up and finding your mother cold beside you. I was in my 2nd year at the University of Ibadan, English literature. I had dreams that were bigger than that small compound we grew up in. I wanted to write. I wanted to travel. I wanted to become someone whose name meant something. Sandra was 16. When the relatives gathered after Mama's burial, the aunties with their tight faces and the uncles who had never visited when our parents were alive, they spoke about Sandra the way people speak about a problem to be distributed. Who would take her? Who had space? Who was willing? I stood up before any of them could finish. I said, "She is staying with me. She is my sister. She's not going anywhere." The room went quiet. Someone laughed, a short, disbelieving laugh. I was a 22-year-old university student with no job, no savings, and a small rented room I shared with 2 other girls. What did I know about raising a teenager? But I knew this. Sandra was the only family I had left, and I was not going to let strangers scatter her like she was nothing. I dropped out of university the following month. I tell people that, and they look at me with pity. But at the time, it did not feel like sacrifice. It felt like the only choice that made sense. I got a job at a fabric shop on Lagos Island, and then I added a second job doing data entry for a small company in Surulere on weekends. I woke up at 5 every morning, and I did not stop moving until 10 at night. I paid Sandra's school fees, I paid our rent, I bought her uniforms, her textbooks, her lunch money. When she needed lesson teachers for WAEC, I found the money. When she got into banking school, I sold the only gold jewelry our mother had left me to pay the acceptance fee. I never told Sandra about the jewelry. She did not need to carry that. I watched her grow. I watched her blossom. I watched her become the kind of woman our mother would have been proud of. Confident, sharp, beautifully dressed, always smelling of good perfume. When she got her first banking job, I cried in the bathroom so she would not see me. I thought, God, I truly believed that everything I had given up had been worth it. Then I met Daniel. Daniel Adeyemi walked into my life when I was 28, tired, and had almost forgotten what it felt like to want something for myself. He was not the richest man I had ever met. He was not the most handsome, but he was kind in a way that felt rare. He listened when I talked. He remembered small things. He made me feel for the first time in years like I was not just someone's caretaker, like I was a woman, like I mattered. We married 2 years later. A small ceremony, close friends, a few relatives, good food, and plenty of laughter. Sandra was my maid of honor. She cried through the whole thing. She whispered in my ear when we hugged at the reception, "You deserve this, Vivian. You deserve every good thing, Vivian." I held her tight and thanked God for my life. I was such a fool. Sandra lost her apartment 14 months into my marriage. She called me on a Sunday afternoon, her voice small and tight, the way it always got where she needed something but was too proud to ask directly. Her boyfriend, a man named Emeka who drove a big car and told very smooth lies, had ended things. Suddenly, brutally. And since the apartment they lived in was in his name, Sandra had 2 weeks to leave. "Come and stay with us," I said immediately. I did not even pause to think about it. Daniel hesitated, just for a moment. I noticed it, but I did not hold it. I told myself he was just surprised. I told myself any reasonable person would need a second to adjust. I told myself it would only be for a few months while Sandra got back on her feet. "She is my sister," I told him later that night when we lay in the dark. "I cannot leave her with nowhere to go, not after everything." He was quiet for a while. Then he said, "Okay, she can come." Sandra arrived with 4 suitcases and a box of shoes. She was 30 years old, beautiful, freshly heartbroken, and, as I would later understand, deeply, dangerously envious. She did not show it at first. She was grateful, warm, helpful around the house. She cooked sometimes. She made Daniel laugh. She told me every other day how lucky I was, how beautiful my home was, how good Daniel was to me. "You have everything, Vivian," she said one evening while we sat on the balcony drinking tea. She said it softly, like a compliment, but something about the way her eyes moved when she said it, across the living room toward the hallway where Daniel was, made the hair on my arms stand up for just 1 second. I pushed the feeling down. She was my sister. I had raised her, the girl I had chosen over my own future. You do not suspect the person you love most. You do not want to. The heart fights the truth for as long as it possibly can. But the truth does not care how much you love someone. It comes for you anyway.
I want to tell you that I was strong when I confronted them. I want to tell you I walked into that sitting room like a warrior, head high, voice steady, eyes dry. But that is not what happened. What happened is that after I read those messages in the kitchen, after Daniel walked in and saw my face, I opened my mouth, and the sound that came out of me was not words. It was something broken, something animal, a sound I had never made before in my life and pray I never make again. Daniel started talking immediately, the way guilty people do, fast, overlapping, his words tripping over each other. He was sorry. It was a mistake. It meant nothing. He did not know how it happened. He loved me. Please, Vivian, please listen. I pushed past him. I walked down the hallway to the guest room. Sandra's door was closed. I did not knock. I turned the handle and pushed it open and stood in the doorway looking at my sister who was sitting on the bed I had bought in the room I had given her, painting her fingernails like a woman without a single sin on her conscience. She looked up, and in the half second before she arranged her face into an expression of confusion, I saw it, the flash of guilt, raw and real and unmistakable. "Vivian," she started. "How long?" I asked. She opened her mouth, closed it. "Sandra," my voice cracked on her name like dry wood. "How long?" She looked at her hands. "Vivian, it is not what—" "Do not." I stepped into the room. "Do not insult me. I have read everything. So I am asking you as your sister, as the person who gave up her entire life for you, how long?" The silence that followed was the most painful silence I have ever lived through. 6 months, she whispered. 6 months, half a year, 180 days of lies told to my face by the two people I would have died for. Something in me that had been holding itself together, barely, desperately, finally let go. "Get out of my house," I said. My voice was quiet, almost gentle, but the words landed like stones. Sandra stood up. "Vivian, please, let us talk about this." "Get out of my house, Sandra." The tears were coming now, hot and fast and unstoppable. "I am sorry. Vivian, I am so sorry. I don't know what happened to me." "You knew exactly what was happening to you. Every single day for 6 months, you knew. You sat at my table. You hugged me. You told me I deserved every good thing." My voice broke completely. "I paid your school fees with my mother's jewelry, Sandra. I dropped out of university for you. I worked 2 jobs so you could eat and study and become somebody. And this is what you did with my love." She collapsed on the floor, literally crumpled, crying, reaching for my feet, saying my name over and over. I stepped back. I could not let her touch me. If she touched me, I might forgive her, and I was not ready to forgive. I did not know if I would ever be ready. I turned around and walked back to my bedroom. Daniel was standing in the hallway. His eyes were red. His face was wrecked with something that might have been shame. "Vivian," he began. "Call a lawyer," I said without stopping. "We are done." I closed the bedroom door. I sat on the edge of the bed and I cried until there was nothing left inside me. Sandra was out of my house by midnight. I watched from the window as she dragged her suitcases to the road in the dark. No taxi at that hour came quickly on our street. She sat on her luggage on the roadside for 40 minutes before one appeared. I watched the whole thing. I do not know what I felt. Grief, anger, something close to pity,
all of it tangled together in a knot I could not undo. Daniel moved into the spare room that same night. We filed for divorce 3 weeks later. The next few months were the hardest of my entire life, and I say that as a woman who had already buried both parents and raised a teenager alone. The kind of pain that comes from betrayal by the people you love most is a different kind of pain. It does not just hurt. It makes you question everything. Every memory becomes suspicious. Every kindness you remember now has a shadow behind it. You go back through years of your life and you wonder, was any of it real? Did anyone ever truly love me? Or was I just useful? I lost weight I did not have to lose. I stopped cooking. I went to work and came home and sat in the dark. My colleagues started looking at me with that particular mixture of concern and discomfort that people show when they do not know what to say. My friend Amaka, God bless that woman, came to my house every Saturday for 2 months. She did not always say much. She just came, brought food, sat with me, and refused to let me disappear inside my own sadness. Some days she would say, "Cry if you need to cry, but you are not dying, Vivian. You are not dying." I held on to those words like a rope. The divorce went through. The house was mine. Daniel had been practical enough not to fight me on that, perhaps because he knew he had no moral ground to stand on. He moved out quietly, took his clothes and his car, and very little else. I heard through mutual friends that he had gone back to his family home in Ogun State. Then the news started coming, slowly at first, then all at once. Daniel lost his job. I do not know the full details. Some said it was budget cuts, others said his behavior had become erratic and unprofessional after the divorce. What I know is that by the time 6 months had passed, he was not the man with the confident walk and easy smile that I had once loved. He was reduced, quieter. Something in him had broken too. And Sandra, I heard, was pregnant. I got that news from our cousin Ngozi, who called me with the nervous energy of someone delivering a bomb. "I thought you should know," Ngozi said carefully. "The baby is Daniel's." I sat with that information for a long time. Daniel, it turned out, had not stood by her. When Sandra broke the news to him, he panicked. He was unemployed, homeless in spirit if not in body, already drowning in the consequences of what they had done. He told Sandra he was not ready. He asked her, this is the part that made my jaw tighten when I heard it. He actually asked her whether the baby was his. Sandra, who had burned her sister's marriage to the ground for this man, was now sitting alone and pregnant and abandoned. I wish I could tell you I felt nothing when I heard that. I wish I could tell you I laughed or felt vindicated or danced around my kitchen, but I'm not that kind of woman. What I felt was something quieter and sadder, a deep, tired grief for the girl I had raised, the girl who had once been worth everything to me, now sitting alone with the consequences of her own choices. I did not call her. I was not ready for that. Perhaps I would never be ready. Perhaps one day I would be, but not yet. What I did instead was turn back to myself. For the first time in years, perhaps for the first time in my adult life, I chose myself.
I re-enrolled at the University of Lagos. Part-time, evening classes. I was 34 years old, sitting in lecture halls with 20-year-olds who wore earphones and typed on slim laptops. On the first day, one of them looked at me with open curiosity and asked, "Are you a lecturer?" I laughed, a real laugh, the kind that comes from somewhere genuine. "No," I said, "I am a student, same as you, just a little late." He nodded, serious and respectful in the way young people sometimes are when they sense a story they do not fully understand. "Better late than never," he said. Better late than never. I wrote that in my notebook and looked at it for a long time. I finished my degree 2.5 years later. English literature, just as I had started all those years ago. The night before my graduation, I sat alone in my living room, the same living room where Sandra had once sat on my couch and told me I had everything, and I felt something I had not felt in a very long time. Peace. Not the fragile, careful peace of someone who is afraid to disturb the surface of their life. Real peace. Earned peace. The peace of a woman who has been broken and has decided deliberately and with full knowledge of the cost to rebuild herself anyway. My colleague at work, a quiet, serious man named Emeka, who was nothing like Sandra's Emeka, thank God, had been gently, patiently kind to me for 2 years without any expectation. He brought me tea when I was swamped. He remembered my mother's death anniversary and sent a simple message, thinking of you today. He never pushed, he never crowded me. He simply showed up, consistently, quietly, like a man who understood that a wounded person needed time and not pressure. We started taking evening walks, then dinner, then long phone calls on Sunday nights. It was slow and unhurried and completely different from anything I had known before. It felt, for the first time, like being chosen, not needed, not useful, chosen. I heard about Daniel occasionally. He had found work again, smaller than before, humbler. I wished him no harm. I had stopped wishing him harm a long time ago. Bitterness is a debt you pay yourself, and I had already paid enough. Sandra had her baby, a girl. I saw photos on social media, a round-faced, innocent little thing who had done nothing wrong and deserved nothing but good things. I stared at the photo for a long time. I felt the old love stir in me, complicated and painful and real. Sandra had sent me a message the day the baby was born. Just 3 words. I am sorry. I read it. I saved it. I did not reply. Not yet. Maybe not for a long time. Forgiveness, I had learnt, was not something you performed for other people's comfort. It was something you arrived at, slowly, on your own terms, when you were truly ready. I was not ready, but I was no longer angry. That was enough for now. On the day of my graduation, Amaka stood in the crowd and screamed my name so loudly that people around her turned to stare. My new Amaka stood beside her, clapping, his face full of a pride that belonged entirely to me. I walked across that stage in my gown and my cap, my degree in my hand, and I thought of the 22-year-old girl who had dropped out of this same university to go and raise her sister. I thought of the fabric shop on Lagos Island. I thought of the 2 jobs and the 5 a.m. mornings and the jewelry I had sold and never gotten back. I thought of the Tuesday evening and the jollof rice and the phone that had shattered my world. And then I thought, look at where you are now. The woman who had given everything, who had been emptied out completely by the people she loved most, had not disappeared. She had gone quiet for a while. She had grieved. She had healed. And then slowly, stubbornly, magnificently, she had refilled herself. Not with what she had lost, with something better. Some betrayals, I have learnt, do not come to destroy you. They come disguised as destruction, but they are really invitations, brutal, painful, unwelcome invitations to finally, truly, and unapologetically begin living your own life. I walked off that stage straight into Amaka's arms, and she held me tight and said into my ear, "Your mother is proud of you. I know she is." And for the first time since the night I stood in that kitchen and felt the world collapse, I cried, not from pain, but from something that felt a great deal like joy. Some people come into your life to love you. Some come to teach you. And some, God help them, come to do both at the same time, just not in the way you expected. Vivian learnt that the hardest way possible, but she learnt it. And that made all the difference. If this story moved you, Share it with someone who needs to be reminded that betrayal is not the end. It is sometimes the beginning. And if you want more stories like this, unsubscribe.